The Mad Piper, the man who played the bagpipe on D-Day. June 6, 1944, Sword Beach, Normandy. As thousands of Allied soldiers take cover from German machine gun fire, one man stands tall on the blood-soaked sand. He has no rifle, he wears no helmet, only a bagpipe, and he plays. The sound of Highland Laddie cuts through the chaos created by explosions, screams, and the merciless impact of Nazi bullets. German snipers watch in disbelief. Allied soldiers think he's lost his mind. His commander had said even attempting this was madness. But Private Bill Millin doesn't care. He has a promise to keep, and nothing, not the bloodiest war in human history, not Hitler's Atlantic Wall fortress, not even death itself can stop him from keeping that promise. This is the story of the Mad Bagpiper, the man who should have died hundreds of times, the soldier who broke every rule of war, and the legend who became one of D-Day's most iconic figures. But before diving into this incredible true story, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe, because the stories we share on this channel are the ones not taught in school. Real heroes, impossible deeds, moments that define the true meaning of courage. Now let's go back to where it all began. The bagpipes. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with Scottish culture, the bagpipes aren't just a musical instrument. They're a symbol of identity, of heritage, of warrior spirit. For over 1,000 years, Scottish clans marched into battle with pipers leading the way. The sound of the pipes was meant to strike fear into the enemy and courage into the hearts of their own men. By the time Bill Millin was a teenager, he was already an accomplished piper. He played at local events, competed in Highland games, and immersed himself in the ancient traditions of his ancestors. The bagpipes weren't just something he played, they were part of who he was. But then came September 1939. Germany invaded Poland. Britain declared war. And Bill Millin, like millions of other young men across the British Empire, knew his duty. He enlisted. Bill Millin joined the Queen's Own Cameron Highlanders, one of Scotland's most prestigious infantry regiments. But it wasn't long before he was transferred to No. 1 Commando, part of the elite special forces units being formed to strike back against Nazi-occupied Europe. And that's where he met the man who would change his life forever, Brigadier Simon Fraser, the 15th Lord Lovat. Now, Lord Lovat was no ordinary officer. He was a Scottish aristocrat, yes, but he was also one of the most respected and fearless commanders in the British Army. Tall, charismatic, and absolutely fearless. Lovat had a reputation for leading from the front. His men would follow him into hell itself. And on D-Day, they basically did. Lovat saw something in young Bill Millin. He recognized not just his skill with the pipes, but his spirit. And when Lovat was given command of the 1st Special Service Brigade, he made Millin his personal piper. Now, this is where the story gets interesting. You see, by 1944, the British Army had officially banned pipers from accompanying troops into battle. The practice had been common in World War I, but too many pipers had been killed. They were easy targets, standing upright, making noise, drawing attention. The military brass decided it was a waste of brave men. But Lord Lovat didn't care about regulations. He was a traditionalist. He believed in the power of Scottish heritage. And he believed that the sound of the pipes would inspire his men in a way that nothing else could. So he approached Private Millin with a proposition. "Will you pipe us ashore?" Bill Millin was stunned. He knew the regulations. He knew the dangers. He pointed out that the Army had banned pipers from combat. Lord Lovat smiled. "Ah, but that's the English. The English have banned it. But we're not English, are we? We're Scottish. And the Germans won't know the difference anyway." It was a moment of pure Scottish defiance, and Bill Millin couldn't say no. The spring of 1944 was a time of intense preparation. Everyone in Britain knew that an invasion of Nazi-occupied France was coming. The question was when and where. Bill Millin trained alongside the commandos of the 1st Special Service Brigade. These were some of the toughest, most elite soldiers in the entire Allied army. They practiced amphibious landings, close-quarters combat, demolitions, and rapid movement through enemy territory. They were being forged into a weapon designed to punch through Hitler's Atlantic Wall. And Bill, he practiced his pipes. He knew that when the moment came, he would have to play in conditions unlike anything he had ever experienced. The chaos, the noise, the terror. It would all be there. But he also knew that Lord Lovat was counting on him. The men were counting on him. The bagpipes had always been a symbol of Scottish courage. Now, they would become a symbol of Allied defiance. As the days of early June arrived, the tension was unbearable. Over 150,000 Allied troops were packed into bases across southern England. Eisenhower had made the decision. June 6th would be D-Day. The invasion of Fortress Europe was about to begin. Bill Millin checked his pipes one last time, oiled them, tuned them, and prepared himself for what would be the longest day of his life. We're just getting started with this incredible story. If you're enjoying this, please hit that like button. It really helps us bring more of these untold stories to light. And stick around because what happens next is absolutely unbelievable. June 6, 1944, 0200 hours. Bill Millin stood on the deck of a landing craft, surrounded by grim-faced commandos. They were part of the massive armada crossing the English Channel, over 5,000 ships, the largest invasion force in history. Their destination? Sword Beach, the easternmost of the 5 Allied landing zones in Normandy. The sea was rough. Men were seasick, vomiting over the sides. The crossing took hours, and every minute felt like an eternity. They knew what they were waiting for on the other side: bunkers, machine guns, artillery, mines. Hitler had spent years fortifying the French coast. The Atlantic Wall was supposed to be impregnable, but it had to be broken. There was no other choice. Lord Lovat was calm, almost eerily so. He wore his trademark green beret, carried his walking stick, and moved among his men with absolute confidence. If he was afraid, he didn't show it. "Remember, Bill," Lovat said, "when we hit that beach, I want to hear the pipes. Give them Highland Laddie. Let the Germans know the Scots have arrived." Bill nodded. His mouth was dry. His heart was pounding. But he wouldn't let Lord Lovat down. 0825 hours. The landing craft ground onto the sand of Sword Beach. The ramp dropped, and hell erupted. German machine guns opened fire immediately. Bullets tore through the air, slamming into men, equipment, the sides of landing craft. Explosions erupted all around. The beach was already littered with bodies, destroyed vehicles, obstacles designed to rip apart landing craft. Commandos poured off the boats, running, crawling, diving for any cover they could find. The noise was indescribable. Screams, explosions, the constant rattle of machine gun fire. And then, impossibly, the sound of bagpipes. Bill Millin stepped off the landing craft, walked calmly through the chaos, and began to play. Highland Laddie rang out across Sword Beach. Men stared in disbelief. Germans stopped firing for a moment, unable to process what they were seeing. Who was this madman standing upright in the middle of a battle, playing music? Lord Lovat was right behind him, walking with his cane as if he was strolling through the Scottish Highlands. "That's it, Bill. Give them a tune." Bullets kicked up sand all around Millin. Shells exploded nearby. Men were dying left and right, but he kept playing. He played Highland Laddie, then The Road to the Isles, then all the Blue Bonnets over the border. For nearly an hour, Bill Millin marched up and down Sword Beach, pipes wailing while the battle raged around him. He was completely exposed. No weapon, no armor, just the pipes and absolute, pure courage. Commandos who survived that day would later say that the sound of those pipes gave them strength, that in the midst of that hell, hearing that defiant Scottish music reminded them why they were fighting. what they were fighting for. Bill Millin became a symbol in that moment, a symbol of Allied courage, of resistance, of the refusal to be intimidated by Nazi tyranny. Here's the truly incredible part. Bill Millin shouldn't have survived. Statistically, it was impossible. He was standing upright, making noise, drawing attention to himself in the middle of one of the most violent battles in human history. Thousands of men died on those beaches. Snipers were everywhere, and yet somehow, Bill Millin didn't get hit. Not once. Years later, after the war, Allied intelligence officers interviewed captured German soldiers who had been at Sword Beach, and they asked them about the Piper. The Germans remembered him clearly. They said they thought he was insane. They said they didn't shoot him because they assumed he must have been a medic or perhaps ceremonial, and that it would be dishonorable to kill him. Others suggested the Germans were simply too stunned to shoot, that the sheer audacity of what they were witnessing paralyzed them for just long enough. Whatever the reason, Bill Millin survived, and he kept playing. As the commandos pushed inland from Sword Beach, Bill Millin went with them. Lord Lovat's brigade had a specific mission: to link up with the 6th Airborne Division, which had been dropped behind enemy lines hours earlier to secure key bridges. And Bill Millin would be there, pipes in hand, as they made that historic link-up. But what happened next? The bridge at Bennoville, the firefights through the French countryside, the moments where Bill's pipes would once again play a crucial role. That's a story for part 2. This is just the beginning of the Mad Piper's incredible D-Day story. In part 2, we're going to follow Bill Millin through the rest of that legendary day, and you won't believe what happens next. So make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on because you don't want to miss it. And if this story moved you, if it inspired you, leave a comment below. Let us know what you think about Bill Millin and his incredible act of courage. The Mad Piper's story continues, and it only gets more remarkable from here. The bagpipes had conquered the beach, but D-Day was far from over. As Bill Millin and Lord Lovat's commandos pushed inland from Sword Beach, they were entering a landscape transformed into a nightmarish battlefield. Burning tanks, shattered buildings, dead soldiers from both sides littering the Norman countryside. And somewhere ahead, 6 miles inland, British paratroopers were fighting for their lives at a bridge that could determine the fate of the entire invasion. Pegasus Bridge. The 6th Airborne Division had dropped into France hours before the beach landings, tasked with capturing and holding 2 vital bridges over the Caen Canal and Orne River. If the Germans retook those bridges, they could bring up reinforcements and armor to crush the Allied beachhead. The paratroopers were outnumbered, running low on ammunition, and desperate for relief. And Lord Lovat had promised them, "We'll be there by noon." But between Sword Beach and Pegasus Bridge lay 6 miles of Nazi-occupied France. German snipers, machine gun nests, artillery positions, and a determined enemy that wasn't going to let the British pass without a fight. Bill Millin slung his pipes over his shoulder, took a deep breath, and began the march that would make him a legend. This is part 2 of the Mad Piper's story, and if you thought playing bagpipes on D-Day Beach was insane, you haven't seen anything yet. Before we continue, if you're not already subscribed, hit that subscribe button now. We're telling the real stories of World War II heroes, the ones Hollywood doesn't always show you. And trust me, you'll want to see how this story ends. By mid-morning on June 6th, Sword Beach was still a chaotic mess, but the initial breakthrough had been achieved. The British 3rd Infantry Division and attached commandos had pushed past the beach defenses and were beginning to move inland. Lord Lovat's 1st Special Service Brigade consisted of approximately 2,500 men, organized into several commando units. Their mission was clear: move rapidly inland, link up with the paratroopers at Pegasus Bridge, and secure the eastern flank of the invasion. Speed was essential. Every minute counted. Bill Millin marched near the front of the column, close to Lord Lovat. The brigadier was still remarkably calm, still carrying his walking stick as if he were on a countryside stroll rather than leading troops through a war zone. "Bill," Lovat said, "I think the men could use a tune. How about The Road to the Isles?" Millin looked around. They were moving through relatively open terrain. German positions could be anywhere. Playing the pipes would draw attention and fire. But Lord Lovat had asked, and Bill Millin had made a promise. He lifted his pipes and began to play. The effect was immediate. Commandos who had been tense, scanning for threats, focused and grim, suddenly stood up a little taller. The music reminded them of home, of Scotland, of what they were fighting for. One soldier later recalled, "Hearing those pipes after what we'd been through on the beach, it was like a shot of pure courage straight into your veins. We knew we were going to make it. We had to, because if that mad piper could stand there playing his heart out, we could damn well keep marching." The first real test came at the village of Cullaville, Montgomery, less than a mile inland from the beach. The village was supposed to be secured by other British units, but German forces were still present. Snipers occupied buildings. Machine gun positions covered the roads. It was a deadly maze. Lord Lovat's commandos moved carefully, using buildings for cover, coordinating their advance with practiced precision. These were elite troops, trained for exactly this kind of fighting. But Bill Millin, he had no combat training beyond basic infantry skills. He was a piper, not a soldier in the traditional sense. And yet, as the commandos moved through Cullaville, there he was, still carrying his pipes, still ready to play at a moment's notice. At one point, a German sniper opened fire from a church tower. The bullet missed Millin by inches, striking a stone wall beside him. Chips of rock sprayed across his uniform. Millin barely flinched. He later said he was too focused on keeping up with Lord Lovat to worry about bullets. British commandos returned fire, and within minutes the sniper position was neutralized. The column kept moving. French civilians began emerging from their homes as the commandos passed through the village. For these Norman villagers, the arrival of British troops meant liberation was real. The Nazis were being pushed back. Many wept openly. Some offered what little food and drink they had to the soldiers. Bill Millin played a cheerful tune as they marched through the village center. French civilians stared in amazement. Who was this Scottish soldier playing bagpipes in the middle of a war? One elderly Frenchman approached Millin and shook his hand vigorously, tears streaming down his face. "Merci," he said. "Merci, merci." Liberation had arrived, and it had arrived with bagpipes. Beyond Cullaville, the terrain became more challenging. The Norman countryside was a patchwork of small fields divided by thick hedgerows, the infamous bougeage that would make fighting in Normandy so difficult throughout the summer of 1944. These hedgerows were ancient, some dating back centuries. They were thick, dense barriers of earth, roots, and vegetation, perfect for defensive positions. German soldiers used them to devastating effect, turning every field into a potential ambush site. Lord Lovat's commandos had to move quickly but cautiously. They couldn't afford to get bogged down in firefights. The paratroopers at Pegasus Bridge needed them. But they also couldn't walk into an ambush. Bill Millin marched with the column, his pipes now slung across his back. The weight was considerable. A full set of Highland bagpipes weighs about 5 to 7 pounds, but he'd been carrying them for hours and barely noticed anymore. Every so often, Lord Lovat would call back, "Bill, give us a tune!"
The bagpipes were doing exactly what they'd done for Scottish warriors for 1,000 years. They were inspiring courage in the face of fear. Around 1100 hours, the column ran into serious resistance. German forces had established a defensive position along a tree line near the village of Breville. Machine guns opened fire as the lead elements of the commando column approached. Bullets tore through the air. Several men went down. The commandos immediately deployed, taking cover and returning fire. This was what they'd trained for: rapid response, coordinated fire and movement, aggressive tactics. Bill Millin found himself pressed against a hedgerow, bagpipes clutched to his chest as bullets snapped overhead. This was different from the beach. On the beach, everything had been chaos and noise. Here, the danger felt more immediate, more personal. A young commando next to him was bleeding from a shoulder wound. Millin helped apply a field dressing while mortar rounds began falling around them. Lord Lovat was moving among his men, directing fire, coordinating the assault. He spotted Millin and called out, "Bill, when we advance, I want the pipes. Give 'em hell." Millin thought Lovat had finally lost his mind. Play pipes during an assault, while under direct fire? But orders were orders. The commandos prepared to advance. On Lovat's signal, they would rush the German position with covering fire from support weapons. "Now!" Lovat shouted. The commandos surged forward, and Bill Millin stood up, lifted his bagpipes, and played. He played "All the Blue Bonnets Over the Border," a traditional Scottish tune about warriors heading into battle. The sound of the pipes mixed with gunfire, explosions, and shouting created a surreal, almost otherworldly atmosphere. The commandos later said it was like something out of ancient history, like their ancestors charging into battle with pipes and drums, except with modern weapons and against Nazi machine guns. The German position was overrun within minutes. The defenders, already rattled by the ferocity of the British assault, broke and retreated. One captured German soldier, when asked later why he hadn't shot the piper, said simply, "I thought I was going mad. I couldn't believe what I was seeing." This story just keeps getting more unbelievable, doesn't it? Make sure you like this video and drop a comment. I want to hear what you think about Bill Millin's incredible courage, and we're just getting to the best part. By late morning, the commandos were closing in on their objective. They could hear heavy fighting ahead, the sound of artillery, small arms fire, the occasional explosion. The paratroopers were still engaged. Lord Lovat checked his watch. It was approaching noon. He'd promised to arrive by 1200 hours. "Increase pace," he ordered. The commandos moved faster, pushing through exhaustion. They'd been fighting for hours. Many were wounded. All were carrying heavy equipment. But they were close now. And then, through the trees, they saw it. Pegasus Bridge! The bridge was small, unremarkable in many ways, just a steel and concrete structure spanning the Caen Canal, but it was strategically vital. The Germans understood this and had been counterattacking throughout the morning, trying to retake it from the British paratroopers who'd captured it in a daring glider assault hours before dawn. The paratroopers had fought brilliantly, but they were under intense pressure. German armor was probing their defenses. Casualties were mounting. Ammunition was running low. And then they heard it. Bagpipes. At first, the paratroopers thought they were hallucinating. The stress, the lack of sleep, the constant fighting. Maybe it was getting to them. But no, the sound was real. Through the smoke and chaos, they saw him. A Scottish soldier in commando uniform marching across an open field toward the bridge, playing bagpipes. Behind him came Lord Lovat's commandos, moving in tactical formation, but unmistakably there, unmistakably real. Relief had arrived. Bill Millin marched across Pegasus Bridge, playing Blue Bonnets Over the Border, while bullets still occasionally zipped through the air from German snipers. Lord Lovat walked beside him, cane in hand, as calm as ever. Major John Howard, who had led the glider assault that captured the bridge, came forward to meet him. He was exhausted, covered in dirt and blood, but grinning. "You're 3 minutes late," Howard said, looking at his watch. Lovat smiled. "Ah, well, we had to stop for tea." It was a moment of pure British understatement in the midst of the largest military operation in the history.
The commandos immediately began reinforcing the paratroopers' positions. They brought fresh ammunition, medical supplies, and most importantly, additional fighting men. The German counterattacks continued, but now the defenders had the strength to hold. Bill Millin found a relatively protected spot near the bridge and sat down for the first time in hours. His fingers were cramping from playing the pipes, his feet were blistered from marching. He was soaked in sweat and probably dehydrated. But he'd done it. He'd piped the commandos all the way from Sword Beach to Pegasus Bridge, 6 miles through enemy territory. And somehow, impossibly, he was still alive. A paratrooper offered him some water and a biscuit. "You're either the bravest man I've ever seen," the paratrooper said, "or the craziest." Millin smiled. Probably a bit of both. The battle for Normandy was far from over. While Pegasus Bridge had been secured, fighting continued throughout the region. German forces launched multiple counterattacks over the following hours and days, trying to push the Allies back into the sea. Bill Millin and Lord Lovat's commandos remained in the thick of it. They helped secure the village of Les Plaines, fought off German counterattacks, and continued to expand the Allied bridgehead. And through it all, whenever Lord Lovat ordered it, Bill Millin played his pipes. He played for wounded men being evacuated, giving them something to focus on besides their pain. He played for troops preparing to advance, giving them courage for the fight ahead. He played at field burial services for fallen commandos, honoring their sacrifice with traditional Scottish laments. The Germans continued to be baffled by him. Captured enemy soldiers repeatedly mentioned the Mad Piper in their interrogations. They couldn't understand why the British would send a musician into combat, or why that musician seemed to be immune to bullets. Allied soldiers, on the other hand, understood perfectly. The pipes represented something deeper than military tactics. They represented heritage, courage, defiance, and the unbreakable spirit of free men fighting against tyranny. Bill Millin became a symbol, not just of Scottish pride, but of Allied determination. If a single piper could stand in the face of Nazi Germany's war machine and play music, then surely the Allies could win this war. As news of the Mad Piper spread through the Allied forces in Normandy, Bill Millin became something of a celebrity. Soldiers from other units would come by just to meet him, to shake his hand, to ask him to play a tune. American troops who'd landed on Utah and Omaha beaches and were now pushing inland heard about the Scottish piper who'd walked through D-Day playing music. They were amazed and more than a little envious. They wanted a piper too. One American officer jokingly suggested they should have brought a jazz band to their landing, but he admitted that bagpipes probably fit the moment better. There's something ancient about those pipes, something primal, like they're calling warriors to battle from across the centuries. British and Canadian troops adopted Bill Millin as a mascot of sorts. He represented the best of what they were fighting for, not just victory, but the preservation of culture, tradition, and identity in the face of Nazi attempts to crush all of that under jackboots and swastikas. Lord Lovat remained fiercely proud of his piper. He never regretted his decision to bring Millin ashore with the pipes, regulations be damned. In Lovat's mind, the pipes had been worth more than an entire platoon of soldiers in terms of the morale boost they provided. And Bill Millin? He just did what he'd been asked to do. He didn't think of himself as a hero. He was just a soldier doing his job, albeit a very unusual job. D-Day had been survived. Pegasus Bridge was secure. The Allied bridgehead in Normandy was established. But the war was far from over. Bill Millin would continue to serve with Lord Lovat's commandos throughout the Battle of Normandy. He would see more combat, face more dangers, and play his pipes in situations that would cement his legend even further. But there's one moment in particular, one incident involving those pipes and a German attack that stands above all the rest. A moment where Bill Millin's music literally saved lives. And there's the question everyone wants answered. How did Bill Millin survive the war? What happened to him after Normandy? Did he ever regret his decision to pipe the commandos into battle? Those answers are coming in Part 3, the final chapter of the Mad Piper's incredible story. Make sure you're subscribed with notifications on because you won't want to miss the conclusion. And please, take a second to like this video and leave a comment. Tell us what you think about Bill Millin and these remarkable stories from World War II. Your engagement helps us bring more of these untold histories to light. The Mad Piper story concludes soon, and I promise you, the finale is worth the wait.
June 1944, Normandy, France. Bill Millin had already done the impossible. He'd played bagpipes on D-Day Beach and survived. He'd marched 6 miles through enemy territory to Pegasus Bridge, pipes wailing the entire way. He'd become a legend among Allied troops and a source of complete bewilderment to the Germans. But his war wasn't over, not by a long shot. In the weeks and months following D-Day, Bill Millin would face some of his darkest moments, moments where his pipes would do more than just inspire. They would save lives. Moments where the legend of the Mad Piper would be sealed forever in the annals of military history. But there's also the question that everyone asks. How did he survive? What happened to him after the war? And what became of those famous bagpipes that marched through hell itself? This is part 3, the final chapter of the Mad Piper's story. And I guarantee you, it's going to hit different. Before we dive in, if you've been following this story and you're not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We tell the stories that matter, the real heroes, the impossible moments, the truth behind the legends. Now let's finish this incredible journey. The days following June 6th were brutal. While D-Day itself was a triumph, the Battle of Normandy became a grinding, bloody campaign that lasted nearly 3 months. Lord Lovat's 1st Special Service Brigade remained in the thick of the fighting. They defended Pegasus Bridge against repeated German counterattacks. They fought through the bocage countryside, clearing villages and engaging enemy positions. And through it all, Bill Millin was there, pipes ready. But the reality of combat was taking its toll. Men were being killed and wounded daily. The commandos who'd landed on Sword Beach were being whittled down. Fresh replacements arrived, but they lacked the cohesion and experience of the original unit. Bill Millin saw friends die, good men, brave men, cut down by bullets or shrapnel. He played laments at their burials, the mournful sound of the pipes drifting across makeshift military cemeteries as Union Jacks were draped over rough wooden coffins. It was during this period that Bill Millin truly understood the weight of what he was doing. The pipes weren't just music, they were a connection to home, to identity, to the reason these men were fighting. Every time he played, he was reminding them what they were fighting for. And then came the moment that would define everything. Late June 1944, the village of Amfreville, east of the Orne River. The commandos were dug in, defending against a German counterattack. The Wehrmacht was throwing everything they had at the British positions, trying to break through and collapse the eastern flank of the Allied beachhead. Artillery shells rained down, German infantry advanced through the bocage countryside under covering fire. The situation was desperate. Bill Millin was in a trench with several other commandos when the order came down. They needed to fall back to a secondary defensive position. But the route was exposed, open ground that German machine guns had zeroed in on. Moving across that ground would be suicide, but staying meant being overrun. Lord Lovat, who'd been wounded earlier in the campaign but was still commanding despite his injuries, came up with an audacious plan. He found Bill Millin. "Bill, I need you to play. Give them the loudest, boldest tune you've got. Draw their attention." Millin understood immediately. Lovat wanted him to be a distraction, to draw German fire toward himself while the commandos moved to safety. It was a death sentence, and they both knew it. "With respect, sir, that's asking a lot," Millin said. Lovat looked him in the eye. "I know, Bill. I wouldn't ask if there was another way. Those are our boys out there. They need to get to safety." Bill Millin thought about the men he'd served with, the friends he'd made, the brothers in arms who'd fought beside him since D-Day. He picked up his pipes. "What do you want me to play, sir?" Lovat smiled grimly. "Something the Germans will remember." Bill Millin climbed out of the trench and stood in full view of the German positions. He positioned his pipes, took a deep breath,
and began to play the Nut Brown Maiden. The effect was instantaneous. German machine gunners, who'd been sweeping the area with deadly fire, suddenly shifted their aim toward this lone figure standing upright in the middle of the battlefield. Bullets tore up the ground around him. Mortar rounds began falling closer, but Bill Millin kept playing. Behind him, under cover of the distraction, the commandos began their retreat. Moving in small groups, using every bit of cover available, they made their way to the secondary defensive position. Bill Millin played for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. He played with his eyes closed, focusing entirely on the music, trying not to think about the bullets snapping past his head or the explosions erupting nearby. Afterward, soldiers counted over 70 bullet holes in the ground around where he'd been standing. Any one of them could have killed him, should have killed him. But once again, impossibly, Bill Millin survived. When he finally made it back to friendly lines, the commandos cheered. Several men openly wept. They knew what he'd done. He'd drawn fire deliberately, put himself in harm's way so they could live. Lord Lovat shook his hand solemnly. "That was the bravest thing I've ever seen a soldier do, Bill. The absolute bravest." Bill Millin just nodded. He was shaking from adrenaline, his hands barely able to hold the pipes, but he'd done it. His music had saved lives.
Shortly after the incident at Amfreville, disaster struck. Lord Lovat, the indomitable commander who'd led his men with such distinction, was seriously wounded by German sniper fire. The bullet hit him in the side, a grievous wound that required immediate evacuation. Lovat was conscious and characteristically stoic about it, but everyone knew it was bad. Bill Millin was devastated. Lovat had been more than just a commander. He'd been a mentor, a friend, the man who'd believed in the power of the pipes when everyone else said it was madness. As Lovat was being loaded onto a stretcher for evacuation, he called for Bill. "Take care of yourself, Bill," Lovat said weakly, "and keep playing those pipes. Promise me." "I promise, sir," Millin replied, his voice thick with emotion. Lord Lovat survived his wounds and eventually recovered, but his war was over. He was evacuated to England, leaving behind the commandos he'd led with such distinction. For Bill Millin, it was a crushing blow, but he kept his promise. He continued to serve, continued to play the pipes whenever asked, continued to be the Mad Piper even as the Battle of Normandy ground on through July and August. The commandos eventually broke out of Normandy and began the liberation of France. Bill Millin was there for it all, his pipes marking each village liberated, each milestone reached. We're in the home stretch now, and I want to hear from you. Drop a comment and let me know, what do you think drove Bill Millin to keep going? What made him so brave? And make sure you're liking this video because stories like this deserve to be shared. Bill Millin served throughout the entire Northwest Europe campaign. After Normandy came the liberation of Belgium and the Netherlands, then the push into Germany itself. He piped through it all. Through autumn rains and winter snows, through the brutal urban combat of German cities, through the final desperate battles as Nazi Germany collapsed. By the time victory in Europe was declared on May 8, 1945, Bill Millin had served in some of the most intense combat of the entire war. He'd been in constant danger for nearly a year straight, and yet incredibly, he'd never been seriously wounded. Bullets had missed him by inches. Shrapnel had struck all around him. He'd been in situations where everyone else was hit, but somehow, impossibly, Bill Millin walked away unscathed. When asked about it later, he would simply say, "I think the Germans thought I was mad. And you don't shoot a madman." But those who served with him knew better. It wasn't madness. It was something else. Call it luck, call it divine protection, call it destiny. Whatever it was, Bill Millin had survived when by all rights, he should have died 100 times over. When the war ended, Bill Millin returned to Scotland. He was 22 years old and had seen more combat than most soldiers experience in a lifetime. He married his sweetheart, a woman who'd waited for him throughout the war. They settled down, started a family, and Bill returned to civilian life.
For many years, he didn't talk much about his war experiences. Like many veterans, he struggled with what we now recognize as PTSD. The memories of D-Day, of Amfreville, of all the friends who didn't come home, they haunted him. But gradually, people began seeking him out. Historians researching D-Day wanted to interview him. Veterans organizations invited him to speak. The story of the Mad Piper, which had become something of a legend during the war, was being rediscovered by a new generation. In 1975, on the 31st anniversary of D-Day, Bill Millin returned to Normandy for the first time since the war. He stood on Sword Beach, now peaceful and quiet, and played his pipes once more. He played Highland Laddie, just as he had on June 6, 1944. And as he played, tears streamed down his face. The elderly Frenchmen and women who'd lived through the occupation came out to thank him. They remembered liberation. They remembered the Allied soldiers who'd freed them from Nazi tyranny. And some of the older ones remembered hearing bagpipes on D-Day, a sound they'd never forgotten. Over the decades that followed, Bill Millin became a symbol of D-Day heroism. He attended commemorations, gave interviews, and shared his story with anyone who wanted to listen. In 2013, on the 79th anniversary of D-Day, a statue was erected at Sword Beach depicting Bill Millin playing his bagpipes. It stands there today, overlooking the beach where he performed one of the most audacious acts of courage in military history. Bill Millin passed away on August 18, 2010, at the age of 88. He lived a full life, a good life, surrounded by family and honored by nations. But his legacy endures. The story of the Mad Piper has been told in books, documentaries, and films. The movie The Longest Day featured a Piper character inspired by Millin. Countless articles and academic papers have analyzed his actions on D-Day. But more than that, Bill Millin represents something fundamental about the Allied war effort in World War II. He represents the citizen soldier, the ordinary person thrust into extraordinary circumstances who finds within themselves a courage they never knew existed. He wasn't a professional warrior. He wasn't trained for combat in the traditional sense. He was a piper, a musician, a young man from Scotland who loved his heritage and his country. And when asked to do the impossible, to march into the teeth of Nazi Germany's war machine, armed only with bagpipes and courage, he said yes. And in 2025, as we're now 81 years removed from D-Day, it's easy to forget what was at stake in that conflict. We live in a world shaped by Allied victory, where democratic values and human rights are enshrined, however imperfectly, in international law. But that world was won by men like Bill Millin, by American GIs storming Omaha Beach, by British commandos fighting through Normandy, by Canadian troops liberating the Netherlands, by soldiers from dozens of nations who came together to defeat fascism and tyranny. Bill Millin's bagpipes were more than just music. They were a declaration that some things are worth fighting for, that culture, identity, freedom, and human dignity matter, that tyranny, no matter how powerful it seems, can be defeated by free people working together. When Bill Millin stood on Sword Beach and played Highland Laddie while German bullets flew around him, he was making a statement. You cannot intimidate us. You cannot break us. We will march forward, pipes playing, until victory is won. And they did. In the years after Bill Millin's death, his fellow commandos who survived the war made sure his story was never forgotten. They spoke at schools, wrote memoirs, gave interviews, all making sure that the Mad Piper's courage was recognized. One veteran who'd served alongside Millin throughout Normandy said it best. Bill gave us something we couldn't get from weapons or training. He gave us our souls back. In the middle of all that death and destruction, hearing those pipes reminded us we were human beings, not just killing machines. We were Scotsmen, Englishmen, fighting for something bigger than ourselves. Bill's music connected us to centuries of tradition, of warriors who'd come before us. It made us part of something eternal. That's the power of what Bill Millin did. He didn't just play music. He preserved humanity in the midst of inhumanity. Bill Millin's story teaches us several vital lessons. First, courage doesn't always look the way we expect. It's not always about wielding the biggest weapon or being the strongest fighter. Sometimes courage is standing exposed, vulnerable, doing what you believe is right, even when everyone else thinks you're insane. Second, culture and tradition matter. The bagpipes weren't tactically necessary. Lord Lovat could have landed his troops without them, but they were spiritually necessary. They reminded men why they were fighting and gave them strength to continue when everything seemed hopeless. Third, one person can make a difference. Bill Millin was just one soldier among millions, but his actions inspired thousands. His story has educated millions more, and his legacy will endure for generations. We live in challenging times. The world faces new threats, new divisions, new crises. But Bill Millin's story reminds us that ordinary people, when called upon, can do extraordinary things. That courage exists in all of us, waiting to be awakened. That standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult or dangerous, matters. On June 6th each year, on the anniversary of D-Day, pipers gather at Sword Beach in Normandy. They play the same tunes that Bill Millin played on that fateful day in 1944. Highland Laddie, The Road to the Isles, All the Blue Bonnets Over the Border. The sound of those pipes carries across the beach, mixing with the sound of waves on sand, reminding everyone present of what was sacrificed, what was won, and what must never be forgotten. Bill Millin once said, "I didn't think of myself as brave. I was just doing what Lord Lovat asked me to do. But if my pipes helped even one soldier get through that day, then it was worth it." In truth, his pipes helped thousands, and his story continues to inspire millions. The Mad Piper of D-Day, the man who played music in the face of death and somehow survived to tell the tale. A legend, a hero, and a reminder of the very best of what human beings can be. Bill Millin's story is one of hundreds of incredible tales from D-Day and World War II. Stories of courage, sacrifice, ingenuity, and determination that changed the course of history. In our next video, we're going to tell you about another D-Day hero, someone whose actions were so crucial to the invasion's success that Eisenhower himself said they saved thousands of lives. And their story is just as incredible as Bill Millin's. So subscribe, hit that notification bell, and don't miss it. And please, like this video, leave a comment telling us what you think, and share it with anyone who loves real history. These stories deserve to be remembered. The heroes of D-Day are fading away, but their legacy lives on. And as long as we keep telling their stories, they'll never truly be gone. Thank you for watching. Remember the Mad Piper. Remember D-Day. And remember what they fought for.